Now, and today we're talking about smart recovery and considering whether or not that might add some things to your recovery or be an option worth pursuing. Uh, we honor all pathways to recovery at Sober Now, and I think smart recovery has some real benefit. I also think that it has some disadvantages. So we're going to do an overview of the program and kind of weigh those pros and cons, and as always, open to your questions, your comments, whether they're on topic or not. How are things going in your recovery? What kind of things can we add to it? So let's get right into it. SMART recovery is, of course, an acronym. It stands for Self-Management and Recovery Training. It's a recovery program that promotes abstinence from drugs and alcohol, and it is distinctly secular in nature, which I think is a lot of its appeal. In active addiction and in early recovery, we tend to be fear-based and shame-based. And so we often say that we're atheist or agnostic. We can't conceive of a loving God or a higher power because our experience hasn't really taught us that. Our experience is that we haven't necessarily received those things from people, much less from something greater than ourselves. And so I think I always advocate the buffet approach. Take what you like, leave the rest. But when it comes to matters of a spiritual nature, I think that's really hard for folks to do. And so I understand the appeal of smart recovery, and I think it has, interestingly, some useful skills that are very specifically taken from cognitive behavioral therapy, rational, emotive, and behavioral therapies. And so this is a bit of a hybrid, if you will, between therapy and addiction recovery in the form of a STEP program. So CBT is cognitive behavioral therapy. Cognition is thoughts. Behavior, of course, is stuff that we do. And it is based in an ABC model. What that means is A stands for an activating event, a trigger, a craving, something that happens, just life on life's terms sometimes. And so that activating event leads to a behavior, which ideally is consciously chosen, but for a lot of us is more a product of impulse. We too often have emotional reflexes and emotional immaturity that surface in our behavior. Recovery is very much a process of growing up emotionally and learning to manage ourselves, our affairs, our responsibilities. So the ABCs of cognitive behavioral therapy are very evident in the SMART program. And rational emotive therapy, as the name implies, is the contrast between rational thinking and what we feel. What my friends in AA say is the longest distance in the world, which is from here to here. So contrasting what a therapist would call dissonance, the difference between what we know and what we feel, sometimes has enormous benefit in terms of our decision making. So the SMART recovery program has 4 goals. The first is to help build and maintain motivation to achieve and maintain abstinence. The second goal is coping with what the program refers to as urges, or what you and I might call cravings, but potentially dealing with other types of urges as well. The third goal is being able to manage our thoughts, behaviors, and feelings in a way that promotes self-control through healthy means. And ultimately, the goal is learning to live a balanced life. SMART recovery encourages fellowship, but the program itself is really geared towards individual growth, individual exploration. And so there's nothing really concretely in the program that says, hey, you need to have folks in your life who can hold you accountable. You need to have folks in your life who can meaningfully and actively support you. So my truth is we're people who need people. We need that accountability. We need people who specifically understand addiction and can spot those times when we're being less than honest with ourselves. The ideas around rugged independence, to me, are very overrated. They're celebrated in our culture, but that's the same culture that celebrates the use of alcohol in terms of our holidays, our traditions, celebrates it as a way to relieve stress and socialize. And so prevailing social norms oftentimes just don't serve us at all. So we're going to walk through a couple of exercises that come from the S.M.A.R.T recovery program. Just going to check the streams real quick and see what questions and comments you have. Of course, we're streaming today on Sober Now's Facebook page, and if you haven't been over there yet, please drop by and give it a like. You'll get all the notifications for future streams and for other cool content that we're creating. Okay. So, the ABCs of S.M.A.R.T recovery work this way. Drawing attention through mindfulness to the incongruence, the difference between what you think and what you feel. Because sometimes our hearts hijack our heads. Sometimes we go looking for that softer, gentler truth or that easier, softer way to manage our circumstances. We run into difficulty when we find a certain person, place, or thing, some truth or situation to be unacceptable. We might see something as too painful, too scary. And so maybe we intellectualize, maybe we act on impulse, but when we rely on what comes naturally to us, because unfortunately a lot of unnatural things come naturally to us, things, of course, tend to not work very well. So, if we're using the ABC model, we're noticing the activating event. What's the thing that set me off? What's the craving that hit me? What's the trigger that's come up? We examine the belief about how things should be, contrasting that to how they are. We are people who are very prone to making judgments. We're very prone to righteous anger. And sometimes we get ourselves in the worst predicaments when we don't think things through before acting. Now, there's a lot of ways that we can practice this. In early recovery, your disease is working overtime, and it's giving you all the reasons why you're okay now, why it's okay to use now. And we encourage folks not to fight with pushing those thoughts away, but rather to think it through. Like, let's say just for today you do use, and then what happens? And when we really think it through consciously, obviously we can spot the deception that our disease has given us. We can see the consequences, and what that requires is rigorous honesty with self. Now, this is why I'm somewhat critical of the S.M.A.R.T recovery program. Is everything about the program is geared for the individual to be able to master themselves, as opposed to having a lot of accountability from others for our own goals. Okay, so we have this activating event, that's A. We have the belief about how things should be, or these ideas about what we want them to be. We have these potential consequences that we could be facing if we act on impulse or make otherwise unhealthy decisions. Now we get to add D and E to this. D is the opportunity to dispute what may be faulty or irrational thinking, what might be your disease talking to you, or what might actually be another voice entirely. Whether that's your old tapes, messages from our abusive people in our past, or it might be, here's what my depression is telling me. Here's what my anxiety is wanting me to be worried about. And particularly for those of us who are survivors of trauma, the impact of PTSD on our perspective is pretty huge. So having the willingness and taking pause, taking that time to examine your perspective. There's going to be a lot of times, especially in early recovery, where we've just completely lost perspective, and we need to have tools for getting it back and maintaining it. E is effective thinking, making conscious choices about what we're going to do instead. And I always want to simplify. So to me, the difference between impulse and a healthy conscious decision can be as simple as 10 seconds, 2 deep breaths, and asking myself, what do I choose? Not what is my emotional reflex, not what is it that I'm angry about, but rather, what do I need to do about this? What is the healthiest thing for me to do? And quite often, the healthiest thing for me to do is to involve someone else in that process, because 2 heads aren't twice as good as 1. They're a million times better than 1. So, SMART recovery is borrowing, like I said, liberally from different forms of therapy. And so the idea that we need to examine irrational ideas or thoughts is based in the fact that emotions don't have to make sense. They can simply exist. And I think, especially in the first few years of recovery, we often find ourselves frustrated with how we feel because we know that it's disproportionate to our current circumstances. I remind folks all the time that when you stuff emotion for years and years and years, oftentimes what comes up in the present isn't just about what's happening today. Today might just be a reminder of other times where we felt this way, other times where we were in very difficult circumstances. Times when we're reactive are oftentimes folks have pushed our buttons, our insecurities have been triggered, things have come to the forefront, and we sometimes give folks a lot of space in our head. We let them rob us of serenity, and so actively coping allows us to shift that perspective and not surrender personal power, not allow others to dictate our choices. Emotional maturity, again, is really what we're working towards, and that starts with the choice, I'm going to respond, I'm not going to react. It gives us the opportunity to ask ourselves, wait a minute, just how important is this thing that I'm all tied up in knots about? It gives me the opportunity to take a step back and get a healthier perspective. Maybe this is something that I just need to let go. Maybe this is something that I simply need to accept. And powerlessness is a huge piece of this, because the things that I find to be unacceptable are most often things that I can't control. So I joke with folks that I serve that I'm only powerless over nouns, people, places, and things. The only thing I need to have control of is me. I don't need to have control over my environment or situations necessarily. What I need to do is have serenity and safety so that I can be the best possible version of myself. We would do well to consider, when we're struggling, what are the expectations that we're contending with? What is it that we expect of ourselves? In early recovery, our expectations of self tend to be very unhealthy. A lot of us are perfectionists. A lot of us are trying to be above reproach, and we put enormous amounts of pressure on ourselves because that's how we learn to deal with fear. And so the SMART recovery program underscores a number of different processes by which we can examine what it is that we expect of ourselves, how we're critiquing ourselves, and the very ways in which we're working to maintain self-control. Whoops. So we're going to go through the ABCs of SMART recovery and see if we can flush this out a little bit further. Because in activating events that include cravings, it's pretty clear-cut what we need to do. We need to not use, we need to do whatever it is that is necessary to not use, no matter what, as my friends in NA say. When we're looking at our expectations of self and situational stress, we can use the ABCDE model in yet another way. So the activating situation is I haven't achieved the outcome that I wanted. I tried something and I failed. The irrational belief that underscores that, or undermines it rather, is the idea that I should always be successful. I should always do things right. And the consequences of that belief are I feel bad when things don't turn out the way that I want them to. Disputing that irrational belief is acknowledging that perfectionism is an impossibility. Just doing my best is more than good enough, which of course is hard for us because we are people who don't necessarily feel that we are enough. And so it's hard for us to feel that we do enough or that we do things well enough to be accepted and cared for by others. Disputing that irrational belief and moving towards the E, the effective new thinking, is coming to terms with what success really is for us. Personally, Ralph Waldo Emerson's definition has worked really well for me. If you Google that one real quick, there's some really sage advice and a little bit of rule number 62, not taking ourselves quite so seriously. Effective thinking is giving myself permission to fail. Failure teaches us things. It also demonstrates that I was willing to take risk. It teaches me things that success doesn't, and it really can be that simple. Muddying the waters a little bit, S.M.A.R.T recovery suggests that if the activating event is a craving, then the beliefs I have about how good a beer would taste on a hot day like today, or how it would be okay if I just used one more time. One of the most common lies that the disease tells us is, I can get away with this. I can control this. And so particularly when we have some time alone, when we have too much time on our hands, this becomes a warehouse for really bad ideas of all the things that I might be okay doing. So that to me underscores the need for fellowship. It underscores the need for friendship. There's very few things more dangerous than a person in early recovery with too much time on their hands. We're people who need people. And so if I look at the S.M.A.R.T recovery program overall, I would say to you, hey, there's some useful skills here, and by all means, add them to your toolbox. Eclecticism is what I find most effective in recovery, in spirituality, in healing mental illness, in overcoming trauma. In all things, I want to take what works for me and leave the rest. And I know that that's hard for folks. It's hard for us to be open-minded when we're fear-based. It's hard for us to receive lessons and supportive people when we're shame-based. And so a little bit at a time, we're breaking out of these past patterns. We're allowing new experiences. We're tolerating discomfort, all of which leads to the opportunity for continuous growth, continuous healing. And as we go, greater and greater possibilities are born. So, just check in real quick. Oh, hey, thank you, Jamie, for writing in. It's not worth it to just feel comfortable. I totally agree. Growth and healing do not take place in our comfort zone. I felt I could get away with using out here, away from everyone. Oh, I'm so sorry. But I called my sponsor and went to meetings instead. Awesome. Perfect solution. Serenity prayer has helped. Remember about control and powerlessness. And yes, I do have a cold. Thank you all for your patience with my raspy voice today. It's almost amusing to me somehow. Picked up a summer cold on my journeys. So what Jamie's talking about is a perfect example of the activating event, the behavior that followed it, and the consequences. And in this case, instead of consequences, you gleaned rewards. You got the opportunity to connect with kindred spirits. You noticed the craving, you caught the things that the disease was telling you, and you turned it around instead of giving in. So kudos to you. That's freaking awesome. Just going to check the other feeds real quick right now. We're streaming on a bunch of places these days, which is really cool. And of course, always want to hear from you, always want to connect with you, and hear about your journey, particularly if we can offer some support or answer some questions in the course of your recovery. So by all means, connect with me. Jim at SoberNow.com is the easiest way to do that. Check out our YouTube channel, which is Sober Now. About 160 different videos there now on different aspects of recovery. Completely free. Just subscribe. You'll get notified every time a new one comes out. And by all means, check out our site. SoberNow.com has moved to a subscription program that is more affordable than ever. It's crazy. Less than $15 a month gets you access to our 28-day home study program, which ensures complete confidentiality and anonymity. It walks you through some of the toughest challenges in early recovery, or potentially gives you a refresher if you've already achieved long-term recovery. There's a second program there as well for affected others, for people like me who have loved ones in active addiction. How do we cope with those things? How do we manage ourselves and continue to care for our families and manage life on life's terms, even when we're terrified for our loved ones? So check out those resources. Would love to connect further with you, and would love to hear about topics that you'd like to see covered in future live streams. I'm going to look forward to being back here with you next Thursday, about noontime Eastern. And in the meantime, please take excellent care of yourself. Please reach out to each other and let us know how we can be of service to you. Blessed be. Talk next week.